Got the audio. All right. Good morning. Or I guess whatever it is, time of day for everyone else. It is morning for me, about 8 a.m. I think we've got maybe just under 48 hours, like a day and a half left, something like that. Let's see, Bevy Jam 7. That is not the right Chrome window. There we go. This is my deployment. Yeah. 1 day, 15 hours. So not quite 2 days. I know, my stream title is a lie. But hoping to get some stuff done today. Hoping to get some collision done today. And we'll see what happens. I feel like there's a lot to do. I'm kind of at the end of like the amount of functionality that I can even add. That's Bevy assets. It's not what I want. I've got a test level up right now. I don't know exactly what I'm going to end up with here. Built a couple of things this week. Reasonably happy with the things that I built. Let's bump this into. So let's see. Right now, isometric. There's these spawn circles, eyeballs. Eyeballs move to random locations. There's also multiple kinds of enemies, so the spawning logic is pretty generic. There are 2 kinds of attacks. One of them is that spinny attack that you see on the screen from like the, I don't know, like the Star Wars droid looking things. And then the eyeballs also, if you are close enough to them, so there's a proximity effect, they will shoot at you whenever they land at the spot that they're going to. In addition to that, I have a number of like crystals that can spawn in that I'm hoping to use for some kind of like, hang on, my computer is running out of space over here. What is going on? Megabytes free. Okay, let's clear that up before I continue here, because that sounds bad. Recycle bin. Nothing in the recycle bin. That's not good. Can I quickly condo something? Yeah, before I crash, that's exactly. Before I crash, I am hoping to destroy some directories on my other computer. Which is unfortunate because that's the stream computer. So the stream actually crashes if that computer goes down. OMG, the isometric perspective is so charming here. I really like it. It's like, I don't think it's a true isometric perspective. I just kind of chose something that was like vaguely isometric and also like close enough, but felt pretty good. So I'm reasonably happy with it. Waiting for my destroy command to work on this other computer before I stop stressing out about it. Okay, that's 60 gigs back, hopefully. So we should be good. We should not crash for the next couple hours. We'll see what happens. But that should give us a couple hours. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the isometric stuff. I'm really happy with the like spawn in animations and stuff here. One of the things that I wanted to do for this jam in particular is kind of like finish effects, if that makes sense. Like instead of having them just pop in, instead of having them just snap to where they're going, like you can see a bunch of these little, I don't know if you can, but you can see a bunch of these little spheres when they move between the locations that they're supposed to go to. They are turning and moving instead of just snapping to the next one and moving to the next spot. When I spawn these like crystals in, they all come in with like a little animation. Those animations are generic, so I can apply them as components to anything that's spawning in. That's all very cool. First time viewing your live stream, what exactly do you do here? I know you didn't mean it like that, but it sounds very much like Office Space joke. Like, so what exactly would you say you do here? I live stream typically Bevy game development, Bevy example development, different kinds of things like mesh shaders and whatnot, or Rust educational stuff. I'll write some Rust code on stream and we'll talk about it. That kind of thing. So I don't really like build things to demo on stream. I build things on stream that become demos, if that makes sense. And then I just answer questions from people who want to know Bevy stuff or Rust stuff or whatever. So chill. Pretty chill stream overall. Random question, is that a 20 by 20 texture for the floor or is a smaller one repeated? Been trying to figure out how to get materials to tile. Materials tiling is relatively easy. This is not even a texture. This is procedural. So if I back out of that for a second, and I'm going to show you what that is first, and then we'll talk about how to get tiling done, because tiling is also fairly relatively easy to deal with. Bevy examples. So there's this crate that I maintain that I find useful because I also maintain Skeen, which is a Blender crate, right? So this texture comes from this crate. This crate builds a procedural grid, world space grid. So every block here is 1 meter, 1 meter by 1 meter. That's why it looks like that. For me, it's not just a texture that looks like blocks. It is literally like 1 square is 1 meter, which I find really important. Like just knowing what the scale of things is. So that's this crate. That's the crate that I'm using for the current project. If you just want to load something that repeats, when you do an asset server load, image loader settings. There's 2 APIs. One of them is going to be load with settings. If I can type, that would be great. Load with settings. So asset server, right? This asset server type, which you already have, dot load with settings. You're going to put the string that is the thing that you're loading, and then you will get a closure. This closure will be the type of the thing that you're loading's settings. So this image loader settings then has a bunch of stuff in it. And if you want your textures to repeat, you can go into the sampler, the image sampler descriptor, which has all of the repeating, etc. configuration, right? So image address mode repeat, you can define it to repeat in X, Y, Z. You can define it to repeat however you want. There are some nice APIs. So if you do, is this going to show me the APIs though? I don't think so. So you're going to have like this settings thing here, which is image loader settings. So let's say you do settings, you do get or init descriptor is pretty common. That will give you an image sampler descriptor. And this has some convenience APIs on it where you can set the address mode to repeat. And then you just set that descriptor when you load it and you get a tiling texture. Like your texture obviously has to be tiling, designed to tile for it to tile well, but you can get the repeating sampling. So if your UVs now go outside of 0 to 1, then you get the tiling. That's how that works. Which I think happens by default if you use like UV transform with standard material and stuff like that. Cool, you stream Rust here too, not in English though, sorry. What language? I don't know why, I feel like Spanish, but there's a bunch of Brazilian people that show up in chat, which is always very interesting to me. I guess Romania. Nice. I don't know anything about, like, I know a little bit of Spanish, I know a little bit of French, things like that. Some Romance languages, but I don't think I know any Romanian. That's very cool though. What else do you like? What do you do on stream? What do you work with? What's your area, I guess? Yeah, cool. The crate that I was just looking at is actually very cool. There's not really all that much to it. Um, but it is a triplanar grid texture. I think the shaders and materials. So this loads into the crate and then it's just available inside of Bevy as an import and whatnot. So there's a little bit of stuff here. It's a standard material extension, which is cool. So it handles all that stuff. And then everything below that, like, core up here is all of the, like, here's how we build the checkerboard. Here's how we build one checker versus many checkers. Here's how we combine the triplanar UVs and stuff, etc. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, it's all just sitting on here. Let's see. One of the things that I noticed that I would like to fix after the jam, that I'm trying to not fix this jam. There's actually a couple of things. So if I run this and I run this with features free camera, this will enable Bevy's internal free cam. Oh, cool. You made a triplanar material painter. Nice. That's awesome. I feel like triplanar is one of those things that, like, if you write shaders, you eventually have to make it to triplanar and pass it. Eventually, you don't have UVs. Building an app in public, nothing serious, just a personal project. Helping out people with questions, nice. So we've got Bevy Inspector eGUI here. One of the things that I noticed is weird is I have the free camera enabled now. It's not, like, enabled in the app, but you can see that, like, when I drag, my mouse no longer moves, which is kind of annoying if you're trying to use the mouse for gameplay. So if I swap to that actual camera, that's all fine, but there's two things wrong here. One of which is, so this is a completely different camera. So there's two things. One of them is that the atmosphere effects seem to break if you have multiple cameras, which is really annoying. So all the colors, wash out and whatever, because this isn't the way they're meant to be viewed. Which you can see, like, a huge difference, right, between atmosphere, lighting, etc., all set up properly, and whatever the hell this is. Yeah. And then that also, because the free cam is enabled, the mouse control gets a little bit weird. So I've been running this app without the free camera enabled, even though it is quite useful because it actually, like, I should be able to click here, drag my mouse and release over here and get it to do whatever I was doing over there. But with the free cam enabled, it doesn't it doesn't do that. It grabs the mouse and locks it to wherever you clicked. So hoping to fix some of those things after the jam, but definitely trying to not do too much. It was a pain, but it supports 225 different textures. I feel like that's a weird number. What do these crystal towers do in game? They don't actually do anything at the moment. I'm halfway done with them, really. So if you look at the base of the towers, there is a little bit of texturing. The blue area down here is stuff that still needs shaders applied to it. So maybe we start off there. Right now, I think that the gameplay overall is effectively going to be towers provide protection to enemies. Enemies mostly kind of randomly move around, and then player has to like there's a demo player controller over here on the side that is just the Suzanne monkey from Blender. I think I'm gonna do like anyway. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I got a lot to do today. 225 is not a U8 though, right? Like it's 256 for a U8. So like, why would it be 225? Yeah. 255? Did they typo? Like 225 is a weird number. I also, why would you be using a U8? I'm trying to think of like the way that you would be using textures like that. I guess like your U8 indexing into a bindless array of textures. I feel like I don't understand why the limit is 255. I think the limit is more likely to be memory, right? And if your textures are small enough to be able to hit 255 textures, then they're probably also small enough to hit, you know, like 512 or whatever. Anyway. So the towers are going to be sort of like protection things for these enemies. I think at the end of the day, the game is actually going to be wave based. The alternative is build out a bunch of levels, which I can do, but is kind of awkward in a sense. The way that everything is spawning in here is with a nav mesh. So you can see that all of the enemies, even if I spawn them like out here, actually I can't spawn them out here because I don't have the right code enabled. You can see how all the enemies end up in this like inner square. That's because it's all a nav mesh. And the nav mesh is in this test level, just the inner square. So I can extend this and make it work differently. And then they will spawn in different places, which is very cool. Because then I can visually identify where everything is supposed to spawn. It's not really all that much going on in Blender for this one. Couple of utility meshes. So when things are spawning in, they use a cylinder that is UV mapped that goes from bottom to top, has some noise applied to it with a custom material, and just doesn't have a top or bottom because they're not needed. The coin I never got around to using. This is the eyeball that's in the game. It's a cube mesh. That's why the UVs look weird over here and why they're like a little bit curved and stuff. This is our little Star Wars droidy thing. I left the shading hard on this so that it would give off like a little bit of a paneled look as opposed to being like fully smooth. I spent most of my free time this week trying to build a system that generates avian colliders and joints between the bones of a rigged character for ragdoll physics. No success so far. Well, that's unfortunate. I mean, I hope you had fun. If you had fun, then it's fine. I feel like I haven't. Are you using like the latest avian release, like the one that came out on Saturday morning or something, or Friday or whatever it was? Came out like either right as the jam was starting or right before the jam. Forget which. This is that rock. So this is just like a in Blender. If you enable some of the extra add-ons and stuff, there's a rock generator. It's not super interesting. It just adds like a stack of modifiers to deform a cube. So I deformed the cube, made it into this crystal-y thing, decimated the mesh to make it a little bit of a harder edge. That's why you can see it like glittering a little bit rather than being fully smooth. The base is just some basic modeling. It was like I started with a circle and just extruded, and then basically did the same kind of stuff, decimated at the end. These two are the things that need custom. That doesn't have UVs. Will that matter? I think we need to unwrap that. That's fine. I grid filled a circle for this interior thing. So we'll just let it grid fill. Export. I think the way that I'm going to go with that, let's start with that actually, because that would be the easiest thing to, I think, see. So unfortunately, WGSL Analyzer is going to yell at me in this file forever. There is no option. I can turn WGSL Analyzer off, but that's about all that it will do. So for the crystals, I have two materials. One of them is this crystal extension. That's the one that's making the crystal look actually nicer. If I go into the crystal extension and I don't do any of this, you can see that they get much darker, basically immediately. It's still got some reflection, which is nice. I think there's more I could do there to make them seem a little bit more, like there's no actual interior refraction subsurfacey kind of stuff going on. It's all just like a faked effect with some alpha. I learned a lot about Rust and Bevy, which was cool. Not sure which version of Avian. Nice. As long as you learned and had fun, then the jam was a success, right? I think that jams are tough, especially if you're trying to like, quote unquote, win, you know? And Bevy's jam specifically is much more of a community event than like a competition. Yeah, WGSL Analyzer yelled at you all week too. Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to Weasel. For those that don't know, it does seem like Bevy is going to move to Weasel. Right now, Bevy has a custom implementation of things that Weasel kind of does. So if you look at the Naga oil repo, you can see how imports get defined and then used. This is all like pre-processing, which is not supported by the language server, which is unfortunate. It was at one point, it got dropped and then got completely pulled out. So Weasel is like a bit wider than Bevy, officially specs some of the same stuff. So like imports, ifs, things like that. And it's a little bit wider used, if that makes sense. Like it's available for not just Bevy users, but also people who are writing WGSL in the browser with JavaScript and, you know, TypeScript and all these other things. That was a hard prompt too. Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like I ever really came up with the theme. You know? Extremely incohesive fever dream. That's kind of why I went with eyeballs instead of other stuff. I was thinking like maybe go in like a rainbow puke direction, but I don't know. I just I feel like it is reasonably difficult to like intentionally make something incohesive or extremely incohesive or fever dreamy and also like fun. I don't know. I did never really came up with anything, I don't feel like. Oh, you see, you were not doing it for the jam. You don't think your skill level is capable of producing quote unquote games yet, only learning opportunities. That's fair. The jam is 9 days. So if you scope it down extremely low, it can be a reasonable time period to like participate, build something, and then submit it. I submit to every jam. I don't finish a game for every jam, is really how I would frame it. For Bevy jams, anyway. Okay, so this then... energy extension. We're going to need this extra on add energy material because I'm handling this via hooks. So in Blender, I've got this mesh, which has a material on it. This material is called energy material. Has a component on it called energy material. Same thing for the crystal. So this is going to be like take this code effectively, which I should probably genericize at some point. Energy material is going to be energy ext. I want to get rid of something here. Get rid of it later. We're not going to use those values, so it's not really a big deal. Basically, all this is doing is when that marker component is... So when the scene is spawned, Skeen adds components. Actually, in my case, Skeen adds them when the GLTF is loaded, which is much nicer. But that's not really like accessible to everybody yet. So when the scene is spawned, then this on add will fire. So the way that it works is with Skeen, if the components get added in the GLTF loader when the scene is created, then the hook runs when the scene is created, and the hook, or the component hook specifically, not the observer. The component hook runs when the scene is created, and the in the scene world, and then the component hook also runs when the scene is actually instantiated. The observer doesn't run in the scene world, only runs in like the main world when things are instantiated. So by using an observer here, when this scene is actually spawned into the world, this component gets added to whatever mesh that's on because it has a stack of components, right? And then we get to grab whatever standard material is on that thing, which means we can control colors and stuff inside of Blender. And then we create the extended material with that stuff on it. You can also do things here like stick everything into like a resource with a bunch of handles and reuse handles and stuff. I'm just not doing that. I don't think it's that important for 7 pillars or whatever I'm going to have. So theoretically, that should put the shader onto the relevant places. I'm expecting something to fail here, but I'm not sure exactly what is going to. What is my goal with my jam game? My goal with my jam game is to make a submission. I think for me, One of the things here is that I wanted to make sure that I did full kind of like full things for the stuff that I did do. So in this case, when you see these little like pillars spawning in, they have the spawn circle. There's like timer based effects. There's a couple of shaders that run. They spawn in with like scaling and transformation, and like they kind of like pop into the game, which I kind of like the effect of. And for me, that was really the goal, to make sure that the things that I did do kind of got finished, if that makes sense. As opposed to building out an entire game and then ending up with like untextured spheres and things that just like popped in without any animation or anything. So for me, I'm actually enjoying working on this. I'm enjoying like the direction this is going in. I think that this is going to be a game that I continue working on after the jam. The original idea for it was something a little bit more like a roguelite, but I don't really have the time to build like a base world and also like the run world, and also handle upgrades and drops and in-run currency and out-of-run currency and like all of these other things that I would need to do to handle this correctly. I just don't have the time this week to get all that done. So really my goal was to like, the things that I did do, like these little spawns and stuff, are like finished. Like I could, if this was in a game that I shipped, I would be reasonably happy about it. I think there's definitely ways to improve what is here. But this is something where if it like ended up in a game and this was sitting on itch or Steam or something, I am okay with the way that these spawn in. Am I using Bevy Hanabi? I really like your spawn circles. I am not using Bevy Hanabi. I'm not using Avian. I'm not using Bevy Hanabi. I'm not really using all that much. I am using Bevy Enhanced Input for input, Seedling for audio. There's no audio in the game right now, so that's going to come later. That's going to be like a thing that I can trigger in response to these timers that I already have set up. So I'm just like not worried about that. I just need to pick and make like some audio for that. Noise for a noise crate, which I'm using for a couple of things. Skeen, obviously, for the Blender integration. Rand, which is always a pain. Lockout for the texture. Shader utils for some shader noise, like Perlin noise stuff in shaders. This is also my crate, so it's not really like, you know, it's whatever. Bevy Rand again for some more randomness stuff. There's so many Rand integration points. Bevy Asset Loader, IS Progress for tracking that. I didn't build a main menu yet. I might do that tomorrow. I'm kind of like kicking UI and restarting the game off to tomorrow is really what I'm doing. Blue Navigator for nav meshes. No Hanabi, no Avian. None of the, like the big crates, I guess, is what I would get at. I did do a short on how those spawn circles work, but I can show you the assets that I use for that right here. This is the spawn circle. So there's effectively two pieces to the spawn circle. Run this. Can I zoom this in? Camera. I don't think transform is not going to work because this is orthographic. I need to find the perspective. I need to find perspective, man. Scale. Can we bump this down to something that is just like close enough to see? Okay. So when I click here, you can see that there's 2 circles moving in opposite directions from that one image, right? So like there's stuff moving counterclockwise, there's stuff moving clockwise, and that's coming from that channel information. So this is, and then you see also like there's a couple of columns that's also spawn in at the end there, right? So there's the blue stuff on the ground and the red stuff that is the columns. There's a couple of columns stacked because visual effects always look nicer if you do a couple of things instead of one thing. But that is effectively the thing, right? So this is the only thing for that plane on the ground. You know, if I click on this and you see that spawn in, this is the only image that's being used. If we go to the shader, this is probably going to be hard to read, especially because of all the red. But at a high level, what I'm doing is I'm taking a rotation matrix. So this is a 2x2 rotation matrix. This is being adjusted by the time global. So like how much time has passed in the game. And we are using that to do what is effectively like our UVs are 0 to 1 in a plane, right? So we subtract 0.5 on each axis to get it to 0, 0 centered. Then we apply the rotation matrix to spin it. And then we add 0.5 back to recenter it inside of the UV quad. That's what's going on here. So we do the subtraction here, multiply by the rotation, and then at the end add 0.5 back to recenter it. Now, this is a standard material extension, so if you pass in UV transform, this 0.5, 0.5 is actually not accurate. So to do like a generic thing that I gave to other people to use, I would have to multiply this by the UV transform. It can't just be 0.5. But you can see here that I'm doing a couple of texture samples. So this is the red channel. I'm realizing I don't have the actual image up anymore. That would probably also be useful. Didn't want to zoom that. Why did it zoom? Anyway, there's the red channel on the outside, the green channel kind of on the interior, and then the blue channel. For the purpose of this effect, I decided to combine the green and blue channels into one and only spin the red channel in the opposite direction. So here's the red channel rotation. So we use the rotation matrix. We do the rotation for the sample, or for the UVs that we're going to use for the sample. Construct the PBR input, sample the red channel, do the same thing for green and blue effectively, then combine them. And that's it. So anything that's black gets discarded because of this line. Everything else gets put into its appropriate slot. And thus you get this one image that rotates one way, or clockwise for one set of channels and counterclockwise for the other set of channels. One of the things that I thought I might want to do is rotate a couple of these at different speeds, or have them be configurable, or have a couple of different spawn circles for different enemies and stuff like that. So this all could be made pretty generic. It just is kind of tied to this one channel-based approach at the moment. Have I checked out Polders, a sandbox city builder? I'm very acquainted with Polders. I have not played Polders. Well, no, that's not true. I have played Polders. I have played Polders because the developer of Polders had it on like their laptop or something and was just like, hey, play Polders. And I was like, cool, Polders. Which was very fun and cool. Polders, for people who are unaware, Bevy game. They have a site now, right? think they might just have Steam. I don't think they have a website. They should have a website. I should tell them to make a website or pay somebody to make a website. But yeah, Polders is cool. Polders is like an old Townscaper project, which is really funny too, because like the way that Tiny Glade also started, which is like the other, or one of the other more prominent Bevy games. Obviously not full Bevy, they have a ray tracing renderer and stuff. But they also started off as like a procedural like wall generator tool and then grew into what Tiny Glade is. And this started off as like effectively like a Townscaper, like minimal version, and grew into like Dutch Townscaper, if you will. Yeah, it's fun. I'm really looking forward to them like shipping this. They are putting a lot of effort into it. It'll be very different by the time I actually really play the actual game. What I played was like truly prototype demo, right? But Polders is very, very cool. I'm looking forward to seeing this launch. I don't know what their timeline is like, and even if I did, I probably wouldn't mention it. But hey, Courier. Hope you're well too, Clutch. But yeah, Polders is very cool. Tiny Glade is very cool. And then we need this little energy stuff. So question here is, did this actually apply? Because we never checked. We just kind of wrote the code. So let me do PBR input dot material dot base color dot R equals, I don't know, 100. Did work. Okay. So we are running. We have the material applied. Is this another code along? How is your game progressing? How is my game progressing? Who knows? This is the state of my game at the moment. There's a couple of like, the eyeballs will fire at you if you are close enough when they are ready to fire. Otherwise, they kind of wander the map. We've got these little like Star Wars droid things that float around and spin. We've got these pillars that are meant to be like protection pillars and stuff. So I've got a lot done in some sense, and I've got nothing done in other senses. You know, like in the sense of like, is this shippable as a game on Steam? Absolutely not, you know? In the sense of like game jam, does it fit the theme? I don't know. In the sense of like, will this turn into something that people can actually play 56 to 60 hours from now? I really hope so. You know, like it just be like that sometimes. So I think do I have time in here yet? I do have time in here. So let's do like, value equals sign globals dot time times, it's not really what I want. I think I want a high frequency sine wave that moves slowly. So I think I want to modulate the X to be more frequent. And then move that kind of slowly. So let's do in.uv dot I guess we could do Perlin noise here too. That might be fun. I think the X value should probably just get ignored. Thinking about the UVs in my head, basically. So in.uv.u.v is really the direction that we want to go in. So if we do this, and then let's do let A equals PBR input dot material dot base color dot A. PBR input dot material dot base color times value. PBR input dot material dot base color dot A equals A. I should really have a demo of just the gem to work on, but I just didn't build that, so rip me. Oh, I missed a let value, let A, expected semicolon. Invalid accessor. There we go. So this then runs its own alpha discard. Let's do if if value is less than 0 or less than 0.2, I guess, discard. And then I really don't want this to be a sine wave, I guess. I just want this to be ever increasing. So maybe we really want a modulo here. Can't really rush this type of work. Demo be cool though. I hope that I come up with something that is worth, you know? Want this to happen more often. And then maybe this is not that intense. Let me grab my camera and move it closer. Perspective. Projection. Eyeballs. Try to move this over to transform. This is going to be massive if I move it, I think. I'm very zoomed in here. Okay, let's move up here. Here's our zoom in on our thing that's going on here. So two things here. One is that it's kind of working for what I want more or less on like the base. But it's not really where I want it to be in that sense. And it's kind of like the UVs on the interior energy area are kind of weird. It's also pretty glossy. I should probably turn that down. I feel like the interior one would do better with noise, and the one above it would do better with this kind of like scaling, you know? You know, like this seems fine for the like tone, more or less. I think it could be maybe a little bit better, obviously, but I think that's fine for the most part. Let's do 30. Right. Instead of a discard, this could be more of a fade, but do I really care at the moment? Not really. Would make a fun horror game. What would make a fun horror game? This game? I think I might want two shaders, one for this cone and one for the other. I was hoping I could get away with doing the single material on both. But I think to do that, the way I would have to set up the UVs would be radial on the base stone, or polar. And I don't think there's an easy way for me to do that. Am I using Perlin noise up here? I am. Let's bring in the Perlin noise that we have. Let's say noise equals Perlin noise 2D. And let's say one of the things here also is that I've been noticing a little bit of what I feel like is weirdness with the blend modes. In this case, we're kind of using an add blend mode, so it is what it is, but see if we can boost this a bit. It's not really what I want. I don't want it to be like flashy. We might have to have more of a place to apply the noise if we're going to do it like that. Yeah, I don't think that's gonna work the way that I was kind of envisioning it to work. I think we're gonna go with this. Yeah, when you zoomed in on the eyeballs straight out of some horror movie, yeah, that's fair. I think the eyeballs are a little bit creepy. When you say two materials, do you have to split the mesh into two, or can you apply two materials to one mesh? You cannot apply two materials to one mesh currently in Bevy. That used to be a thing that got removed at a certain point, that people want to add back, but has not yet been added back. So the nice thing about this is that these are all individual meshes already. So if we look at this, the gem up here is individually UV unwrapped. This cone is individual. this inner plane thing is individual, and then the base is completely UV unwrapped by itself as well. So these are all individual. This base is actually textured in Substance Painter, which is really nice for some things because you get to use the I don't really want to call it ambient occlusion, but like you get to use curvature maps and stuff like that, which is really nice. Which makes things sort of immediately a little bit nicer without too much effort if you can use the curve data and stuff like that. So on this, I could just make this 2 materials, right? Because they are 2 meshes. I was just hoping to come up with one shader that could be applied to both, but if that's not going to happen, then we don't need to force it, right? We don't have enough of these. I'm going to call this energy well, I think. We don't have enough of these for the performance to matter, like really at all, right? So if we do this and we go down to crystals, here's our material plugin. I'm just going to add another material plugin. This is going to be an energy well extension. We don't have that defined yet, but basically it's going to be like the same thing, right? See, this is crystal extension. This is energy extension. These could all go into their own files to be their own materials. But do I care enough to do that right now? I don't think so. I'll call this energy well material. Gonna energy well extension. Energy well extension doesn't currently exist. So we do that, we do that, we do that. We set the shader to the right shader. And then I think that all just works, but we do need to restart the app because this is like new Rust code. How's the jam going? The jam's going. It's going. The hoping I'm gonna end up with something that is like playable, you know? I have a couple of nice things. I'm happy with what I did accomplish. Like kind of did take the path that I intended to take. There are a lot of things that I feel like I could make better. The SS effect looked really nice. Nice. That's good because that's the thing that I was talking about having worked on. And I made all the assets and stuff. So you know, if the only thing that comes out of this is I successfully made the assets and effect good enough that people like them, then I think that's a win for me for the jam. Hoping I can get more than that done, but you know, sometimes you just got to take your wins where you can get them. So here we've got that, and then here we just want to probably do noise. Although, you know what I'm just realizing? I didn't change the thing here. So this is going to have to be energy interior is going to be a new material. I'm so zoomed in this directory. Energy inner. We're going to do a new material, but I really want to clone this. We're going to call this energy well. Energy well is going to have energy well material on it. We're going to get rid of energy material. I'm going to export. And we already see that the GLTF has updated, which is really nice. Let's get rid of noise for a second. I didn't register the hook. That's what I didn't do. Really do be like that. It would have told me if I was paying attention to the warnings, which are clearly marked in yellow here, and probably also in my terminal. But alas, I was not. Yeah, it's highly reusable too. Assets are like currency for game building. Yeah, I built the spawn circles in a way that is very generic too. So it's not just the like shader that is reusable, but um the entire chain of effects is reusable. Like all of this timing and stuff is reusable. I have this thing that I'm not like. I wanted to do this as observers, but I didn't have time to figure out how to fit this into an observer world. So I'm doing it as one-shot systems instead. So I built this extension trait to basically just register a system and then throw it into a resource. And I have a couple of components that are dedicated to being like the things that happen when a thing is spawned, right? More or less. And they have their own systems for like, this is handling scale, this is handling translation. So they can be used together or separately or whatever, which is really nice. So if we go over to the spawn circle stuff, this is going to be a little bit too much to probably go into fully, but the idea here is in lib. All I have to do is pick what I'm going to spawn from a list of things that are in that resource. So I could get that resource and I could get the keys and then spawn them, but I'm just not doing that at the moment. And then we get the spawn system from that resource and we init the spawn circle with that system ID. So now we can spawn any entity or any kind of enemy or rock or anything at any location in the world with a customizable color on the spawn circle. So these are blue, for example, that's here. These are red when the enemies come in. And then it will call this function after the chain of events that needs to happens, such that it spawns in. So the spawn circle, the cylinders, the other stuff happens, all the timers expire. There's a time at which this thing is supposed to spawn in. That calls that system. That system can be written for every individual thing. So we have one for crystals. We have one for the other two as well. One shot spawn gem rock. So this is like super simple, right? This is spawn with a scene root, add a transform with these, animate in components on it, and some marker component and things like that. So this is it, but we could do more interesting things in this system as well. We could do anything, which is nice. I feel like this is going to be obscured is the wrong word. I feel like this is going to be replaced whenever BSN ships. This feels like a pattern that I only really need because BSN doesn't exist and because it's hard to do things, especially things that access the world in reusable ways. And by hard, I mean like it's just not trivial. BSN. the classic question, what is BSN? Because it hasn't shipped yet. This is BSN. Basically, currently, Bevy has a scene representation, but that scene representation is just the world, right? So your entire app is a world. There's a render world. That's the other really prominent world that people think about. But every scene also has a world. So if you look at the scene type that exists in Bevy today, it is literally just like effectively a new type wrapper around a world. So when you load in something like a GLTF, I think I actually have my GLTF just like sitting here. So let's just look at this. This has a bunch of scenes in it, right? And these refer to a bunch of different things. For Gemrock, there's 4 nodes in it. If we look at the nodes, there's a bunch of things in the nodes not directory, the nodes array that is like things that are supposed to be in with the like Gemrock stuff, right? All of my nodes are in here. So basically what happens when you load a GLTF is all of these nodes and materials and resources and scenes get instantiated into that world. And then it just sits in that world until you want to instantiate it into your actual game. So when you do something like scene root is really the common way that people do this. You will get a handle to that scene that contains the world with all of your stuff in it. And when you put scene root on a entity, what this does is goes through everything in that scene world and basically copies it into the main world and instantiates it as an instance. Instance is a little bit of like a heavy-handed way to say it just copies it in. Like it's literally just cloning it. There's a new one. But yeah. So that's the way things work currently. Scenes are kind of just like worlds. BSN is something that Cart's been working on for a while. That is a whole new approach to the concept of scenes and bundles and components and how do you spawn things in the world and how do you modify them when you're spawning. There are a couple of nice things in here. For example, right now, if you are spawning things that have observers on them, it can be kind of tough to figure out where to put the observer when you're spawning. Thus, there is kind of like, I'm just going to gloss over it and call them helpers for now. But the idea here basically being that like currently you can have components. We used to have bundles. Now we just have mostly components. There are required components, but required components can't access the world to instantiate their values. They can't access the values of other components to instantiate their values. So they're a little bit limited in that way. You can instantiate them with arbitrary values, but you can't instantiate them based on the value of something else. BSN has a whole system for how do you create entities with a bunch of stuff on them that then when you spawn it in a different place, you can patch something deep in that hierarchy and spawn the whole thing with the patched version. That's the TLDR of BSN. I've skipped over basically everything, but it is cool. We don't know when it's going to launch. It's been in development for a bit. But now with that context, you can see why this thing that I've built, which is basically a way to get arbitrary access to values in the world and use those to spawn, why this would get replaced by BSN, right? This can just be a BSN call with a bunch of stuff wrapped up in like some random function or whatever. And then you can just use that anywhere instead of needing to have this level of indirection where you're like triggering a one-shot system and then spawning. We'll see though. You mostly see yourself waiting for BSM when writing UI code. It's so hard to write dynamic UI in the same way you write other Bevy logic. I don't think it's hard. I think it's just verbose, and UI tends to be verbose. Right? Like, if you think about it, writing the actual code for, picking a button or on hover or changing a background color, um, changing a border color, defining the way that a node is laid out, like those things are not necessarily hard in the sense that they are unsolved problems. They just get very verbose. There's also a question around like the classic way to write UI at this point. I'm going to say classic, but like dating myself if I don't call it classic, I guess. But like if you think about modern UI frameworks, really popular modern UI frameworks, um, Vue, Svelte, React, et cetera, et cetera. These are all systems that kind of like let you define how something is going to be represented. And then they kind of handle diffing behind the scenes, like whether it's virtual DOM diffing or some lighter weight diffing or like just, fine grained signals or whatever. It's all generally the same kind of category of stuff. And Bevy doesn't really have that per se. And that I think is the piece that BSN is effectively bringing to the table for UI. I think it's bringing that. It's hard to say that it will bring that though, because yeah. Anyway, there's this convention around like in Bevy you spawn stuff, and then there are systems that react to spawn stuff. And in all of these other UI systems, you don't really think about actively creating thing like DOM create element or whatever, like creating the actual DOM element and then maintaining that state is not something you think about generally when using modern UI frameworks. In Bevy, you do still have to think about creating that thing and then maintaining its state. So yeah, I mean that's how I feel about that. I don't necessarily think it's like hard in like a difficulty sense. I think it's verbose. Yeah, it's not hard per se, but for example, conditional UI just feels awkward since you can just have function impl bundle without spawning in a functional way. I will absolutely give you that it feels awkward. I think it feels awkward to me is always going to be a valid statement. With BSN, without BSN, like, hey, this feels awkward is like, it's your experience, right? So it's valid. Um, Energy well, I have a syntax error. There we go. We get blinky light. I don't think I want to discard anything in this at the moment. I think I want this to hum a little bit. So +1/2 gives us 0 to 1. Unless I mess up my syntax. So that's kind of cool. If I make this full screen, obviously it won't work, but camera. As useful as Bevy Inspector EGUI is. So you can kind of see this pulsing a little bit, which is kind of cool. And it pulses kind of irregularly, which is nice. Like it's not just a sine wave, it is noise based. So when is that actually going to pulse? You're not really sure. It's not regular and sine wavy. It's a little bit more I don't want to just say it's a little bit more magical, but it's like a little bit more natural, if that makes sense. It's a little bit more organic in the way that the noise shows up. Because you can't really predict when the noise is going to happen, which is nice. I should probably modulate this based on. I have two options in the back of my head. One is, and these are never going to be overlapped like this in the actual game, so I'm not worried about this like Z fighting issue here. Two things. Are the crystals linked? If the crystals are linked, then it does kind of make sense for the lights to be synced at the base. If the crystals are individual, then they could be, you know, different, or they should be different. I think the crystals are going to be linked for now. So we'll leave it at being the same, but we could use the world position, which is what I'm doing for the rotations as well. We could use the position in the world, feed that into the noise, and then use that for some stuff. So I'm imagining something a little bit more like this kind of a setup for a level where it's like these are all. I mean, if I can get the time to create lasers between them, I probably will. But this is going to be the general setup where they are in some positions and there's some enemies walking around them. And if the enemies are close enough to an active tower, then they are protected. And if not, then they aren't. And I think that the materials here for the thing under it and the light are good enough, which is really all I'm going for at the moment. I'm going for good enough. I'm not going for like I'm looking at this going, oh, it could be better if XYZ. And yes, that is true. It could be better if XYZ. But I think this is good enough. And that for a game jam, that has to be okay. There's also things around the player that I want to do. I think I'm going to do modeling and animation for a player character off stream, because it sounds disastrous. It's a whole bunch of work, and I'm going to have to just like lock down and do it. Any thoughts about using custom command instead of component hooks when spawning things? Different use cases, I think. I think those are different use cases. When do you feel like they're the same use case? It would be my question. For example, should have a Q in here. A knit spawn circle for me is a custom command. So if I spawn these in, all of these little circles, those are all initialized via a custom command, which kicks off a whole bunch of stuff, some timers, et cetera, right? If I click into this, you can see there's a custom command. It gets some textures, some meshes, some stuff. Adds a resource, spawns it in, etc. I don't know if I said that earlier, so definitely did not. I don't think you missed that. I think I just never said that because nobody asked. But then we world spawn and we spawn in a bunch of stuff, right? This is a good use of a command in my mind, especially versus a hook, because there's no hook to trigger off of, right? I could force this to be a component, and I could put this like I could force this onto an entity. That entity could take these same things as like inputs. Um, on add, I could handle this kind of like world spawn stuff. It's a little bit different because in a custom command, you get mutable access to the world or exclusive access to the world, which means that you can do things like quote unquote instantly, right? This is actually creating an entity in the world. It's not queuing a command to create an entity later. Whereas if you are working in a hook, you get deferred world as a type instead of world. Right? You get deferred world instead of world, which means you can't do structural changes. So if you wanted to insert a resource, you literally can't unless, well, you can't do it with access to deferred world. You have to queue a command that then inserts the resource. So you can insert the resource as long as you don't need it. And you can queue things up like this and it's fine. But deferred world itself doesn't give that access. Um, Now, for things that are coming in from like Blender, for example, like all of this stuff comes from Blender, right? The eyes, the little droids, the gems with the bases and the other things. All of the meshes have components on the materials. That's why the gems look like the way they do, because those are getting replaced on ad hook. I could instead like modify it as I was spawning it or do other things. Like one of the patterns that I find myself kind of wanting, which is interesting, I feel like, is I'm using a development version of Skeen for this project. And the development version of Skeen puts its data into extensions. So if I open my export here, there's this extensions thing here. So when I export, all of this component data goes into a GLTF extension instead of extras. And what that means, it's funny, I have handle image support and I didn't even use it for the jam. What that means is that, I guess I should show the data. The data would make more sense to people who don't work on the project. So the data ends up in this extensions field. This is something that you can access inside of Bevy using something called a GLTF extension handler. This is a trait that I implemented for 0.18 and got merged. And this gives you access to a whole bunch of stuff, right? So on material, whenever the mesh is created, when a mesh and material are spawned, when a scene is created, when it's finished, like all these other things, right? So what Skeen does is implements that. With a type registry and some other stuff. And it's probably easiest to notice if, so on GLTF node, right? Insert whatever components are in that extension data onto the node. So this is in the GLTF loader when the GLTF scene is actually being constructed. As it's being constructed for the first time in the loader, these components are getting inserted. One of the things that I feel like I find myself wanting is the ability to access this component data after Skeen does. Which I think works just fine. I haven't tested it out yet, so caveats abound. But this is doing direct insertion onto that entity. So this component just immediately gets onto that entity. Things like hooks do fire, like component hooks, not observers. Hooks do fire when this is happening. So if you can do it inside of a hook, that is a really good place to do it. If you can do it inside an observer, that happens after the scene instance has been spawned, or as the scene instance is being spawned, more accurately. And then there is like the opportunity for people to write their own GLTF extension handlers that then do things like check entities for specific components and do logic inside of this GLTF extension handler to create materials and stuff like that, which is also a really interesting use case. Because what that means is you can pre-set up. So right now what I'm doing, because this is the like, I know people are going to look at this and I know people are going to be like, oh, how does Chris use Scheme? So I didn't want to do something too weird. Where's our things? But like for the crystals, right? Right now we do a couple of observers. This is totally valid. So as the scene is spawning, we replace these materials. We take those marker components that are there, we grab the standard material and we replace it with another material. This could absolutely be done inside of the loader with the component data that was already inserted. So if you are comfortable making the material that you are trying to construct a resource that is part of your GLTF as it's loading, that can go into the loader, which is now really interesting because now you can do pretty much anything to a material, right? We're doing this already with the standard materials. If we look at the crates, we're going to want to look at Bevy PBR. Bevy PBR, source lib, GLTF extension handler. So in 0.19, this is a new thing that got merged this week. Basically what's happening here is that when there is a material and you have Bevy PBR enabled with the right flags, which is all on by default, just to be clear, then a GLTF extension handler will create the standard material with the appropriate label and add that as a labeled asset. Right? So now you get this labeled asset. This like sits in that load context because this material just gets, you know, created and constructed and whatever. And then when you spawn things and you need materials to be on them, you can grab that by label from the load context and insert any material you want. So in theory, you can do anything you want here now, right? You will get the GLTF material data. You will get the extension data that is on that material. You will get the components, if you want them, on the entity when it spawns the mesh and material. And you can use all of that information to like construct a toon shader that is just part of that scene world, and you can spawn fully ready to go. I don't know how many people are actually going to do that overall, but it is very possible, which is kind of cool. Anyway, big tangent. Don't know how many people are actually interested in that stuff, but it's one of the things that I work on that I enjoy thinking about. So I think I'm good with the energy stuff on the crystals. They're good enough. I think the crystals are done. I've thought about other things too, like putting little shields around them and stuff, but I think the crystals are just done. That's I could do more. I think the shadows especially are one of the interesting things that could happen, right? Like the shadows here are literal shadows, right? As if these are actual meshes. And I think realistically, if these were crystals, these shadows should be like refracted light that come through the gems. But I don't think I have time to do that. You appreciated it, but you'll probably forget when you sneeze next time. Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. I think that the stuff I'm talking about there is like uh I don't want to call it advanced because like altogether it's advanced in the sense that like if you don't know about it already, then it's a lot. But like functionally, I could explain it to anybody. So I think that when it comes to collision, I think everything in this game is actually 2D. Right? Like this is clearly a 3D game, but if you're doing things like attacks and collision with these lasers that are sticking out, the lasers are just gizmos right now. They still need actual textures and stuff. Um, so if I like go down here, the eyeballs will shoot at me and they will just use gizmos for that shot. They should also really be like giving some kind of anticipation before shooting instead of just immediately shooting, but it is what it is. So these are going to end up being cylinders that come out from these eyes and stuff. Um, One thing that I want to do is restrict the player to the nav mesh so that you can't do this and sit off the map. The I chose spheres because I knew they would be easy. So what we're gonna do, I think, is for collision between like the player and these lasers. The lasers can be raycasts effectively. The player can be a circle, like a bounding circle, on the same plane as everything else. The actual enemies, you'll notice even the bases of these crystals are circles for a reason. Everything is a circle because circles are one of the things that Bevy supports for colliding. Collision is the wrong word to use, but I was thinking ahead, and there are effectively two things that I can use. There's bounding circle, and there's AABB 2D. Technically speaking, there's also bounding sphere, but this is not a 3D game, right? Like if we look at the actual gameplay here, or what will be the actual gameplay, the game is a 2D game. If you flatten everything into the plane that is the grid right now, everything works. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to flatten everything. It's going to be a circle on that plane, and then it's all going to be circles. Circles all the way down to the plane. The other thing that's nice about circles is it makes collision easy to detect. And if everything is the same shape, then we can do circle collision casts, right? So we can cast a circle forward, which right now, if we wanted to do like AABB bounding circle collision casts, yeah, we would have to implement them. So the options are like use parry. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Parry, rapier, rust. Two D, 2D, 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 2D. Rapier is not what I want. I want parry. Parry 2D. So parry has a bunch of bounding volumes. If we need to get more complicated than circles, we would need to use parry. We could use some other stuff, but really it's going to be parry. Why do they have bounding sphere in 2D? That feels weird. That feels like documentation issues. But parry has a bunch of extra shapes and stuff, etc. Is really what I was trying to get at. Really weird that they have 3D shapes in 2D. But I want to stick with kind of just what Bevy supports at the moment, without having to build my own stuff. So let's do. We aren't going to be able to see these things is one of the annoying things. I kind of did make everything unit circle sized, kind of on purpose. So everything here you can see kind of fits into a square. I click right on the center here. This should go right in there. You know, it's a unit circle. So are the eyeballs. The eyeballs are unit circles. The droid spheres are half of that. So the math here should work out pretty well. And then I think the player is also going to be a unit circle, but we'll see. We'll see what I do for the player at the end of the day. Because the player still, again, I have to model and animate and implement the player. So what is the easiest way to get started here? Probably put a doing the ray cast between the laser and the player and just detecting some of those rays, I think is the place to start. So let's start with a module here. How much time have, yeah, we got plenty. I don't know that I'll finish all of this, but I'm going to do kind of a short stream today because I know that I'm going to have to do a bunch of work today, and I need to go heads down at some point. So pub mod, we'll just call this collision. Collision isn't quite the right word. I'm going to do use Bevy prelude star. I'm going to pub struct collision plugin, impl plugin for collision plugin. And I just stick app here usually instead of using the underscore. Then we need to do this should probably go in the laser plugin at some point, but right, laser hit player. This is going to be query for player character at some point. I'm only going to have a single player character, so I'll use single. So this will be player. which also makes it nice because if you want to do laser to player, that's like a 1-to-1. So you only need to do as much detection as is a single laser to a single player. The one thing that's weird here, I think, in my head, is that other than the fact that this isn't in scope, um, with player character. So theoretically, this would be like add systems, fixed update, laser hit player. But the way that I'm currently drawing the lasers is per entity. Or per entity type is the way I'll put it. So there's a spin laser function. And spin laser is defining that distance and the rendering all in this laser. This is right now just like all of the scaffolding around, like one of the things moves to a spot and then spins with the laser, and then those components get taken off and, you know, things happen. So this rotation is really I could just do the collision here. Trying to think about this. Do I want the collision to be a separate plugin, or do I want the collision for this to be calculated right here? Because this is every frame we are going to need to calculate whether the forward here hits. So I think that this is where we do it. So I think that the collision plugin that I was going to write, maybe not. Maybe we just pull player over here instead, right? This pulls in, and then we have player and we have current transform. We have transform forward, which is where our ray is going to be. So if the laser is done, then we're not going to do any collision detection. If the let's see, player dot, I guess that is the transform. We just want XZ. Bounding, do I need bounding circle here? I think I do. Bounding circle. Center at player position. I guess we can just do like player dot xz or player dot translation dot xz. This could also be global transform. The player currently is embedded in the level. So I think I do actually have to use global transform here, which is interesting because if we use global transform, then I'm going to want transform helper as well. In the actual end version, this isn't actually going, this is like the player is going to be an individual top level entity rather than being embedded in the scene. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't think we need transform helper. Trying to think about, because the location of the laser is going to be in the same place no matter what. And they are spawning top level. So we'll take global transform for player, even though we don't really need to do anything with it. We will construct this with a circle radius of 0.5, I think is the right thing here. So this is our bounding circle. And then we want array 2D, right, where the origin is transform translation xz and direction is transform.forward, right? Weird that that's an issue. Going to see what the Rust compiler has for me. Expected dir2 found dir3. Forward.xz, I think is what we need here. Does that give us a vec? Oh, that's unfortunate. Why does that give us a vec? Anyway, doesn't matter. This could theoretically foul, even though I don't think it's going to ever. Right? Because the forward direction that these are facing in is never like up. So unless it was vec3y, which would mean that x and z were 0, then this direction wouldn't have a direction, but it will have a direction because the only places that it like looks forward in the current implementation is horizontally. So we have our array 2D. Right? And we have our bounding circle. And I want to limit it to a distance. So we can take our array. We can take our, what did I say this was? 2, something like that. This is forward times 2. So I think this is 2. Direction recip. Do we need that? That is not something we can actually set. So we can actually construct that without using new. Okay, cool. Origin direction max. We can't actually construct this directly. Origin direction max. So we don't need to construct this array ourselves then. Interesting. Raycast, right? Raycast 2D bounding circle. Raycast dot circle intersection at player circle. This returns us a option hit. So otherwise we don't hit, we don't care, we return. This probably needs to be a reference. Otherwise we have a hit and a distance. We don't really care about the distance. In this case, all I really want to say is hit player. Now, there's probably things that we should do around like batching how many times you get hit in a single frame. So this probably, I feel like this probably becomes a message. Oop. See, system parameter, spin laser, conflicting transforms. Let's get rid of transform helper. This is a mute transform on spin laser timer. So let's do without spin laser timer. And then this is hanging, unfortunately. So we're going to kill 83, 453. 453. And then we'll run again. Not sure why that was hanging, to be honest. Easy enough to deal with, though. Okay, so theoretically, we now have player hits on these lasers. Only for the small ones. And then this probably turns into messages that we handle, right? All of these hits are going to happen in fixed update, basically, because they're game logic hits, and that's where I know that I have them. So I am going to end up using, why did those stop? That's weird. That's a thing that I need to go fix. These are returning. That's the only thing that I added in here, right? Return. Oh, this is continue, isn't it? This is a loop. Easy bug. Wrong ball. How's everybody else's jam going, by the way? So we need to do the same thing for these eyeballs as well. I think these are also going to be ray casts in the same way. It's a 50% chance to... it's a 50% chance to pick one or the other. I'm just saying. We just got 7 eyeballs in a row. It's too random. Technically it is random, right? That's not part of the gameplay, so I'm not worried about it. But that's really funny. You know, if I cared enough, we could print the seed and see that happen again. So we get hits here. These are going to be messages, because I want to batch these hits, I think. I think it would be really awkward if you were able to get hit by one thing like 20 frames in a row. I'm just thinking through, like, I think I want to batch them, but I'm not sure I want to batch them because these are going to hit they're going to apply their damage or whatever. And then they need to, per entity, have a cool off before they can hit again. So there's going to be some kind of resource here that stores like cooldowns. Or maybe we stick a component. We only look for hits if this entity doesn't have the cooldown component on it. I feel like that sounds better rather than building up a resource. So like this is going to be like a query for laser cooldown. Right? Laser cooldown doesn't currently exist. So we'll have to create it. I'm going to move this into a different module. I can feel my voice going a little bit. Struct laser cooldown. This is going to be like a timer. Right? And this timer this is only going to get inserted if we hit. So laser cooldown. They just do little damage per update. I don't want them to hit 17 times in a row, though. That just sounds really... like, that just doesn't sound particularly fun. I think that the cooldowns and the amount of damage over time can be configurable, right? These are running in fixed updates, so there is going to be a set frame, like set amount of frames. It's not going to be variable, which is good. But even with a set amount of frames, I don't think I want the damage spread out across like 17 frames. That just feels kind of awkward to balance. I think if you get hit, you get hit. If you don't get hit, you don't get hit, right? You're saying, I'd assume you need more than that. Otherwise, you can only be hit by one enemy at a time. No. What do you mean? I don't see where we would be locking ourselves down to a single enemy. If you're referring to the resource, the resource would have stored that data per entity. And anytime you want to store data per entity, wow, I'm really losing my voice here. Let's do timer from seconds. Laser cooldown, timer from seconds, timer once. Does the cooldown go on the enemy and not the character? Yes. Cooldown goes on the entity that is firing the laser, specifically. So if your laser hits a player, then you have a cooldown for some amount of time before you can hit the player again. That's how this is going to work. So per laser, each laser can only hit you once on a frame. I think that is a good restriction. It doesn't feel good to be like, let's say you were fighting, I don't know, a boss fight or something, and a laser like happened to land directly on you, and it's like a 2-second laser. So now you got hit for 120 frames of damage. That doesn't feel good, you know? Like if you get hit 2-3 times in that time frame, like once every half a second, that feels much more reasonable. But 120 times feels really bad, right? Like just watching your health bar go down, there's nothing you can do about it because you got hit once. That feels like a special attack, not an every enemy. Okay, so this is going to need to tick this timer. This is the laser. This is the laser cooldown. If the laser is done, we remove the cooldown. Otherwise, we perform the rotation, and then we do our cooldown check. We don't actually care what's inside here. This is the timer, isn't it? So let's do timer. This is going to be mutable. This is going to be get mute. Technically, this could be like an option or something, but we're going to grab this. We're going to do cooldowns. Cooldowns is going to be a mute laser cooldown. This is going to be okay. I can never remember whether the calls are returning result or okay, or some option. I wish there was a little bit more consistency. Cooldowns get mute. So if like the timer has to tick no matter what. Time.delta just finished. If the cooldown finished, then we can hit. If the cooldown hasn't finished, then we can't hit. So if it just finished, we remove laser cooldown and hit. Otherwise, we can't hit, and thus we continue. Right? So this does like, if we have a cooldown, tick the cooldown. If the cooldown ticks over, then we can hit and we can like continue with our logic. Otherwise, we have to bail out. And thus, this logic doesn't run unless that timer ticks. So hopefully we should see one hit at a time here. Ooh. I need to like have some tea. Yay, good RNG. So this now only hits once every spin. We just got hit 5 times because we just kind of stayed there. And each of these can hit whenever they want to. So now really all we have to do is react to the player getting hit because we are now correctly detecting player hits. Not on the eyeball, but on the other thing. And then the logic is going to be very similar for the eyeball. And we need to kind of decide what happens when the player gets hit. And stuff like that. But I think that's going to be it for now because my voice is really, my voice is really starting to go if you can't hear it. And I'm not sure why, but I'm going to go drink some tea. I might stream again tomorrow. I don't know. The jam ends at the end of tomorrow. So I'm going to keep working on this, see how far I can get. hopefully get a bunch done today. And then I will see you all next time. Thanks for hanging out.